Welcome, everyone. Really glad to see you today. Welcome to the panel, New Screener, New Legislation, a New Era for California Reading at the California Reading Coalition's annual gathering. I'm Jessica Hamman, founder and CEO of Glean Education, and your moderator for this discussion today. As you know, the past year has brought significant shifts in California's literacy landscape, all in service of the state's comprehensive literacy and biliteracy approach. This fall marked the statewide rollout of the new Reading Difficulties Risk Screener, SB 114, written into Ed Code 53008. This policy requires California districts to screen students in kindergarten through second grade for risk of reading difficulties. It also asks districts to share with parents the instructional response plan for students identified as at risk. This October, Governor Newsom signed new legislation, AB 1454, which, in tandem with the trailer bill AB 121, establishes requirements and provides funding, importantly, to support the adoption of evidence-based instructional materials, updates to the Administrator Credential Program, and professional development for educators. Together, these developments represent a new era for California reading, one that aims to drive student literacy progress throughout the state with initiatives that focus on identification, prevention, and high-quality equitable literacy instruction. Today, we welcome three leaders: Bonnie Garcia, the statewide literacy co-director at the California Department of Education; Becky Sullivan, the director of K-12 English Language Arts in Curriculum and Instruction at the Sacramento County Office of Education; and Marshall Tuck, the CEO of EdVoice, a California nonprofit advocacy organization focused on improving public schools for low-income students through lobbying and policy work. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to share their perspectives, followed by a guided discussion and Q&A led by me. Bonnie Garcia from the California Department of Education will kick us off. Go ahead, Bonnie, you can take it away.
Thank you, Jessica, for that warm welcome and the introduction. And I want to thank the Reading Coalition, specifically Todd Collins, for keeping literacy at the forefront and making sure that it remains a top priority in California with events such as these. And also to Todd and Leslie Zaroya for reaching out to me a few months ago and inviting me to be here on behalf of the California Department of Education. If we're going to be moving the needle on student outcomes in literacy, which ultimately supports improving outcomes across other areas, this work has to be done collectively. So I truly appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to contribute to the discussion on California's new screener, new legislation, and the new era in literacy, which I just love that title. We're in a place of opportunity right now. California has the largest, most diverse student population in the nation, rich in cultures, languages, and dreams of millions of students who will shape our future. So our students have hopes and aspirations and limitless potential, and they're counting on us to make those dreams a reality. So that's why in California, we're taking a comprehensive an intentional comprehensive approach to literacy and biliteracy that's grounded in the ELA-ELD framework, our dyslexia guidelines, and standards for TK through grade 12. And this approach really ensures that students are going to be reading by third grade and beyond through equitable, high-quality instruction, appropriate assessments, interventions, and on our end as the educator, strategic planning that supports all learners across California. And thanks to Governor Newsom, State Superintendent Tony Thurmond, Senate and Assembly members like Rubio, Rivas, Marasucci, Portantino, advocacy groups like Marshall's EdVoice, CalTalk, Families in Schools, CTA, and many others, this approach has been supported over the years by multi-level initiatives and by multi-level investments, all building blocks to our comprehensive system, such as the recently released Golden State Literacy Plan, which includes the $65 million which were allocated for screening for risk of reading difficulties, including dyslexia, 40 million which are allocated this year so that we're implementing annual screening for all K through 2 students so that we're catching risk early and providing timely interventions before challenges become too costly and much more difficult to address. We've also have the $715 million that are allocated for literacy coaches and reading specialists, which Becky leads a big part of. 215 million that are allocated this year to eligible schools, hiring coaches, developing literacy programs, providing targeted intervention, and, and being able to access the specialized educator training and also participation in our Move the Needle initiative cohort for cross-state collaboration, innovation, as well as capacity building. And really, this grant is transforming classrooms, is transforming student outcomes across California. And we hear this from LAUSD, we hear this from San Diego, from Pittsburgh, from Sanger, from districts across the state saying what an impact this particular grant has had. Also, we have the recently released Professional Learning Pack, which includes the literacy roadmaps TK through grade 5, literacy content blocks with secondary and multilingual guidance coming in the spring, and our P3 learning progressions in language and literacy, all released just this May. And this year, thanks to AB 121 and AB 1454, we have the $200 million for evidence-based literacy professional development. That is huge. And the much anticipated follow-up ELA, ELD instructional materials adoption. And I emphasize much anticipated because I think it's something that a lot of people were looking forward to. And in addition to the literacy standard added to the credentials via SB 488, this newest piece of legislation, AB 1454, educational leaders, administrators, literacy specialists, reading authorizations are now going to be required to be prepared to support teachers in providing effective means of literacy instruction. And these are some of the final building blocks of our comprehensive approach. Literacy is not just an educational goal. As we know, it's a civil right. And these investments reflect that understanding, as well as California's unwavering commitment to every student, regardless of their background, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of the languages that they speak, so that they have access to literacy skills that unlock lifelong learning and opportunity. And because of the consistent and concentrated efforts that so many groups have made, we finally have arrived at a place where we have agreement, more agreement than we have had over the past years. And together, and that includes CDE receiving questions from the field, which we really have appreciated, we can ensure that students in California are reading, they're learning, and they're thriving.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bonnie. Now I'll turn it over to Becky, please.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you, Bonnie. I ditto to everything that you said, and it's really an honor to be leading and have led so many of the literacy projects in California. This is a great time. We are moving toward a coherent focus for literacy instruction in California, and it gets tighter and tighter in its messaging with every initiative and every piece of legislation that comes out. As Bonnie talked about, literacy has had millions of dollars allocated to it. And one thing we need to be really mindful of is that we can't take a piecemeal approach to the work. It's not just about the screener, it's not just about the materials, and it's not just about training. It's really about the system, both at the district and site level, functioning together in a coherent way. In order for a school to function at a high level, it needs to live within a district system that is functioning at a high level so that they can support each other. And really, sometimes I think of the job of the district office is to support the work of the schools. So how have you aligned your district office systems so that the schools can get the work done that they need to do? One of the pieces I'll be addressing in a little bit is having a comprehensive literacy plan that serves as a strategic roadmap for improving reading, writing, speaking, and listening outcomes for all learners across all grade levels. And that's about integrating your curriculum, your instruction, your assessment, and your supports so that you are not piecemealing things. Having clear vision, clear goals, statements that reflect your district and organization commitment to literacy for all students that also reflects the state priorities as we move into that more coherent vision and focus for the state. Having measurable goals and outcomes and an equity focus, ensuring access and success for all of our learners in California, that promotes both biliteracy and literacy in the state. So I'll keep that short so we can get on to the meat of the topics.
Wonderful. And we'll turn it over to Marshall Tuck.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jessica. And it's really fun to be on with Bonnie, who's really driving at the state level all these different initiatives and focus pieces of work and helping to guide that. And then Becky, who's just an absolute anchor. I think so many of us are always like, what does Becky think about this issue? Because she's out in the field seeing so much of the work. So it's really fun to be on with both of you and appreciate the work that you do, Jessica. And of course, I think it's been consistent on every panel today. Give a huge shout out to Todd for just kind of bringing us all together so consistently and so regularly with a clear goal of how do we get more kids reading at grade level in this state. And also want to give a shout out to everyone on this call. There's a bunch of practitioners on this Zoom. There's a bunch of folks from advocacy organizations, and everyone should feel good about where this state is. We have a long way to go, which we'll talk about, but this state just had the greatest improvement on ELA since COVID this last year. And again, I think all of us are in this work because we know we can do better, but it's important to celebrate that was real progress. And that's in some districts like LA and Compton and Lenox was on earlier are making real gains on literacy, using a lot of the practices that are being discussed today. So I think folks should feel good about that. And then a lot of the advocacy, a lot of these efforts that have passed, leadership from the governor, and on down, Speaker Rivas, Superintendent Thurman, but a lot of that folks on this call have been driving this work for a long time and pushing for things like universal screening, like Decoding Dyslexia has been working on for so long in other areas. And so I just think that it's something that we should all feel good about and just want to send out just fun, love, and shout outs to this entire group. And then, because we're all practitioners, we all dive into the work, whether we're on the advocacy side or on the school side, we got to do more. And we have to keep doing more. And I think, as Esther mentioned on a prior panel, we move into implementation. I did want to just share a couple of quick slides just to tee up, I think, some of where we're at on the work for the group. And we can share these later. And it does start with the data. And we talked about the celebration of data because we've made real progress in the last year. But we also have to anchor on where our state is. And this is never to bring down a conversation. It's to focus on where is student achievement today so we can get to where we want to be tomorrow, which is what we all believe in, every child having those core literacy skills to have opportunity in the future. But this is a quick snapshot of the state today. And you see, we've got all students at 44% grade level. This is for third grade. We get a little bit better in the higher years. We go up to 49% for all students, but they give you kind of a snapshot of third grade. And we've got some real challenges. Low-income Black students at 25% at grade level, and almost half of them are not near standards. So just to remind us, we have work to do as a state. And then also, it's not just about our absolute performance, because a lot of states have work to do, but on a relative basis, California still ranks below the rest of the country on fourth grade proficiency. And again, we do a little better in eighth grade, but not a whole lot. 33rd overall, 29th for low-income students. We're 39 for Black students out of 48 states that have enough Black students, which is something we really got to focus on. It's a real challenge. And we're 38th out of 48th on ELs. So we just kind of anchor here about, and again, this group on this call, everyone's in the game and we're focused on it, but we just got to remind ourselves we have a long way to go and we can get there with the progress we're making. And this is a historical picture, which still shows that there's progress over the last 22 years. It's too slow, but the gaps have actually grown a little bit. So non-low-income students are actually making more progress still in spite of all of our collective efforts than low-income students when it comes to reading and literacy. So we just need to keep all of that anchored and in mind as we keep doing this work. And again, I know I'm preaching the choir, but we think it's always essential for us to start on results. Now, as a lot of folks on this call know, there's just a lot of factors behind these achievement gaps. Some are outside of schools. Poverty and historical racism play huge roles in terms of where kids actually start. And we know that there's so many gaps that start well before kids get in the education system. A lot more adverse childhood experiences for students that are having real challenges with reading. But there's a lot that the school system can embrace. And as Bonnie, I think, laid out quite clearly and effectively up front, we've just made a lot of progress on our policies in this state. And I think that the growth that we saw from what the work practitioners are doing in the field and the work that members of the legislature and the governor and folks in the CDE are doing at the state level and folks in the county like Becky and Leslie, the progress from last year is going to keep growing because we've got the anchor foundation mostly in place right now, policy-wise. And if we all do our jobs on the implementation, we can just see more and more student success. Bonnie mentioned most of these. I think it is important for us to also remind ourselves, California is the only TK, I think one of the only ones in the country that's doing TK for all. And that's huge for literacy. It gets kids started earlier on their literacy journey. And we know that low-income students are starting much further behind in kindergarten than higher-income students. So we kind of really like that. And longer-term policy, we've got to figure out a way to do more for 2- and 3-year-olds as well at a state level. But I think this is a snapshot of what Bonnie mentioned in terms of what's in place. Again, on the prior panel, Esther talked about implementation, and just want to make that point in this opening that as an organization, we kind of say passing the policy is the 50-yard line. Implementation, from state all the way down to classroom is unless it changes classroom behavior, unless it shifts instructional practices, unless it accelerates student learning, the policy doesn't mean a whole lot. And so we think there's just a lot of work to be done for this collective community to get to the finish line, which is all kids having those core skills that they need on the implementation side. And that starts with the state when it comes to AB 1454 and the companion budget bill in AB 121, having really strong instructional materials and professional development lists. It comes down to supporting districts and schools at the county level and where necessary at the state level in the actual rollout of the policies. As was mentioned, really strong integration of the district literacy initiatives. As Becky mentioned, it's not piecemeal, it's got to be integrated. Just doing a better job of sharing best practices. A lot of districts and counties are doing really good stuff here. And then we have to have this strong feedback loop back to the electeds. So this is somewhere I think the advocacy groups like EdVoice, like Families in Schools, like Dakota Dyslexia, like Fulcrum, like NAACP, California, and others, getting feedback from you on the field as to what is working and what's not working, so we can get that information back up to Becky, back up to folks in the legislature in case we do need to have improved legislation from what we're learning through the implementation cycle. So with that, I'll pause. I know we have a lot more to jump into, but really wanted to kind of drive home that point of we've made real progress. We got a ways to go. The policy framework is mostly there. We got to make serious progress on the implementation side collectively to get this thing done for kids.
Excellent. Thank you to all of you for framing that for us. And now we'll dive into a few guided questions and then we'll open it up to some of the chat questions as well. So the first question is for Bonnie. The universal screener rolled out this year, which is very exciting for California. What have you been seeing out there and how has it gone so far?
Well, first, we are seeing educators who are just grateful and thankful that this is now a requirement. It's really being recognized as essential to supporting our students so that we are in fact moving the needle. So to Marshall's point just a second ago, we're receiving a lot of questions around implementation for the field because people want to do this right and they want to do this right the first time. So some of the questions that we've been receiving have been around what is the best time to screen? And the legislature requires that students have sufficient instruction in foundational skills before they are screened. And this is really important to note because screening too soon, and it is at the district's discretion when they determine sufficient foundational skills. But some important considerations are thinking about if I'm screening too soon, might it lead to results that might not be valid? And also, if we're waiting too long to screen, it might lead to some missed opportunities to provide appropriate early interventions with enough time to adjust plans and see our students make progress. There's also questions around whether or not screeners can be used for comprehensive benchmarking, reclassification, and diagnosing students with a disability like specific learning disability or dyslexia. And the legislation is very clear on this, that for the purposes of the statute, screening is not to be used for anything high stakes. As we know, screening is a brief and essential tool that focuses mostly on foundational skills such as phonics, word recognition, fluency, and it should be viewed as part of a broader process of a district's comprehensive system. And it is used as a first step to supporting with identification of needs of students who need extra support, which could include, and even the legislation notes that it could include the specific instruction focused on students' needs, monitoring progress, providing early intervention in the general education class, one-on-one small group tutoring, also, if needed, further evaluation. However, we know that to be successful readers and writers for long term, knowledge and skills go beyond foundational skills. They include things like oral and written language development, which are not typically covered in screeners. So when we're thinking about using screeners for anything else, we really need to take a pause. We really need to ask questions such as, why am I looking for this assessment? What is the purpose of screening? What is the data that I'm trying to get? What is it going to drive? And will this brief screening tool, which typically might focus just on foundational skills, really provide fair, accurate, and valid results that meet those needs? And it's important to say that there are instruments from the approved list that do go beyond the required measures and that go beyond the required tasks, and that may lend themselves to comprehensive benchmarking throughout the year. And that is at the district's discretion. But still, one needs to, during the planning time, during making these decisions on comprehensive assessment systems, one needs to really ask themselves, what am I trying to measure? And will this tool that I am using provide accurate results for those purposes? And I want to be clear, though, again, for screening for risk of reading difficulties for the purposes of this statute, it is not to be used for anything high stakes. Another really good question that we keep getting is whether or not students who are English learners, whether they have sufficient English or not, if they should be screened in English and in Spanish, for example. And it's the same question that we get for students who are in dual language immersion programs, whether they're English only or English learners. Should we screen them, for example, in the language that they're being instructed? And the legislation is clear on this too. Students who do not have sufficient English must be screened in their primary language. However, the law neither requires nor precludes districts from screening the student in more than one language. And in fact, there's good research that would support that approach. Lastly, there are questions about whether or not students with disabilities, including students in non-public schools, are to be screened. And the legislation, again, is clear on this. All K-2 students should be screened. However, a parent guardian can opt out their student. They may also exempt them if the student already has a diagnosed reading difficulty, if they are a struggling reader already and that's already been diagnosed, or if they have and qualify and are eligible for special education services or 504, or they're in the middle of being evaluated for eligibility, and really screening them would just prove to be redundant and because of the evaluations that they're getting for that eligibility. But it's really important to communicate to parents at this time also what the purposes of screening are and eventually what the results will be. Because if we hear, I think anyone, you have children and you hear your student is at risk, it can cause one to really go up the ladder really quick if they don't understand what that means and the structures that are put in place to support those students' needs, and how those students will be monitored, communicated with the parents, and to see what possible next steps there will be. Last year, districts were selecting the screener that they were going to approve for their district. So it was really a year of exploration and installation. And this year has been more installation and has really been the year of initial implementation, which is typically the most challenging year. So I just want to commend everyone for all of the work that has been done. I echo Marshall, we need folks to be calling us. We need to hear from you. We need to know what's going on so we know what next steps we need to take as a state. So, if we're going to move the needle on student achievement so students are reading by third grade and beyond, we need to, again, collectively work together, keep these questions coming so we're supporting. But it's really been a year of implementation, and folks are wanting to do this right.
Exciting. So to our other panelists, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I can jump in here too. Bonnie, I agree with everything that you've said. In Sacramento County, we have an ELA, ELD literacy network that we run with our district leaders, our curriculum coordinators. We have coaches that come, and then we're also hearing things from our 800 schools across the state that are in the literacy coach grant. And so I'll talk a little bit about what they're saying their needs are like for those next steps. And that is the hot topic right now is the what next. So I'll put this message out for those of you that are at county offices of education and district leadership. This is what we're hearing. So my guess is it's going to be pretty similar across the state is what do I do now? So I've screened, we got our testing protocols in place, we have our testing windows. Some are already thinking about adjusting for next year. Most have not screened kinder yet. I saw some questions in the chat. You should also look at whichever the 4 screeners that you chose, what's the guidance that they give on the testing windows. I know some of them are to wait until after that winter holiday, but we know that a screener just gives us a flag for a possible future reading difficulty. And what we want to do is to create an instructional response to that screener data, looking horizontally and vertically at the data to see maybe is it an instructional issue that I need to do something about, or is it maybe a particular child that's flagging and the other kids are not. Maybe that's just a single issue I might want to do some intervention on. And also realizing that there are some parts of the screener like rapid automatic naming, you can't really practice for that or intervene for that. So what are some alternate ways I can make sure that I'm supporting that student? So next steps is a big thing. Another big ask of the field is how do we clearly communicate with families about this? Are there some templates for us? Are there models? And I know they're out there. So if you have access to those, share those with the schools that are within your district or within your county. And also maybe talking about what are our next steps. So clear communication with families. And Bonnie, you talked about the support for multilingual learners. We're hearing that a lot too. Like our district's telling us we can only screen in one language. Well, there's nothing that precludes you from screening in English and Spanish. If the child has enough proficiency where you want to gather some information to see what the strengths in the other language are, you should do that. There's nothing that says that you cannot. Also, the getting your schools or even cross-district together to collaborate on some of the issues that they're having. There's really strength in numbers, and there's so many good ideas out there. So get everybody into a Zoom room and share their information. Ask some tough questions and have them share about how they're handling what they're encountering through this screening process. And then we also, Bonnie, we're hearing about the opt-out issue. What do we do? And, just because a child or a student is on an IEP does not mean that they should be opted out of screening. The assessments are different, and assessments that students go through to see if they qualify for special education or not are some similarities, but they're different from the screener. This is going to give you different information that is going to be useful in the moment in your classroom moving forward. So just because they're on an IEP or possibly headed to being on an IEP, that doesn't mean they should be opted out. There's probably very few students you should be opting out of the screener. So that's what's happening in our county and things that we're hearing also across the state.
Really helpful,
Just,
Becky. Thanks so much. Yeah, Marshall.
One quick thing on the screener might be interesting for the group.
Please.
So we did a sample of 150 districts in the state, kind of a good representative sample to get a sense of what did folks actually choose and what are they using. Again, there's just an area where we think that advocacy groups can be helpful. So just to give the audience a sense of what this sample, and it's pretty big, again, representative sample, you saw about 48% pick amplify. Amira was 23%, multitudes 26%, 27%, and then roar, because it didn't have the kindergarten, was used in combination. So just to give people a sense of what screeners are being used. And I think what we'll try to also do is make sure we get the information of which districts are using which screener, because that's a nice place to think about cross-district collaboration and cross-district sharing of best practices. And then just some of the qualitative feedback in terms of why districts chose different screeners. And this came from the minutes and just other conversation with folks, whether it was Amplify, where a lot of folks had already been using Dibbles already. And so that was something that they just kind of kept moving forward on. With multitudes, people really liked the robust PD support and the fact that it's free and had a lot of strong multilingual capacity. And then Amira, some of the districts kind of mentioned they'd like some of the new kind of assessment, just some of the AI tools that they had related to it. So just thought, given we're talking screener, just wanted to share a little bit of that so people could see what our districts actually using and what are some of the reasons they said for why they picked what they chose.
Oh, that was really interesting data. So thanks for sharing that, Marshall. And actually, I'll kick another question back to you, Marshall, while we're talking. There's a lot of questions coming up in the chat about AB 1454, and it's likely to usher in some major changes relative to how reading is taught and among other things. What is actually in the bill? And we got specific questions around the professional development piece. So if you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, as was mentioned earlier, there's a lot in the bill, and then there's going to be a lot on implementation. So what I'll do here is just share what the bill actually says. And again, we put it in a slide because it's pretty dense. But for AB 121, so just to give people some broader context, this was all originally one bill. And then when the governor put $200 million in the budget, then they put the language around professional development out of AB 1454 and into the budget trailer bill. And so what this says in terms of the PD is that the state board will approve this, the CDE, California Department of Education, will actually create a recommended list of professional development for folks to use related to the criteria defined in the bill, which oftentimes we'll say evidence-based literacy instruction, but there's a defined criteria in the bill. We have a link to the bill at the bottom, and we summarize it here, where there's really 4 areas that the PD has to actually meet the criteria. So first, it's got to be aligned with evidence-based means of teaching foundational reading skills, and that's defined explicitly. You can see that here in terms of kind of really systematic instruction and print concepts, phonological awareness, phonemics, phonics, et cetera, and then also calls out you must have clear oral language development. You got to attend to that and also attend to the needs of English learners and students with special needs. So that's in the bill, as is alignment with the ELD framework, as is alignment with the current new TPEs and the program guidelines for dyslexia. So that I just encourage folks to go and read the bill, because that criteria is the anchor criteria by law. And then there's additional criteria being developed, and Bonnie can speak to this because she's living it probably on a regular basis, but being developed at the CDE level that state board will approve. But that's similar for the instructional materials as well, as there is criteria in law that has been passed that must be met for the professional development providers when it comes to the PD, as well as for the instructional material providers. The bill also says explicitly that while the state's putting together a list, districts can still choose to use professional development that's not on the list that's put forward by the state. But if they choose something that's not on the list, that must meet this criteria. So it must actually certify that what they are using the dollar for does meet the professional development criteria. And again, there's similar language for the instructional materials in 1454 that states if you go off the list, you must still meet the criteria defined in law. And then in 121, there's $200 million that's allocated that goes out to districts, can only be used for the purposes of professional development to deliver on these criteria related to effective means of teaching literacy. Bonnie, did I feel like did I cover it well?
Yes, you did. You did amazing. I think that what I would add is there is going to be an opportunity to certify all of that, where districts are going to have to report back to the CDE the number of teachers that they provided professional development to, as well as the names of the professional developments that were used. So that is going to be collected September 1st of 2029. And then another added layer of accountability is the department is going to have to report back to the legislature what a summary of all of that. So there is this added layer of accountability for the districts to ensure that the statute is being followed, and for the state to be able to go back to the legislature and say, this is how it's going. So there's a lot of great things happening with this particular piece of legislation. Another really nice thing is it is for certificated and classified staff of TK through 5. And if there's additional funding left for, after the right educators are provided professional development, there could be other educators that could be provided the PD, such as this is really being worked out right now through the criteria and the guidance that the department is developing, which is actually going to be going to the state board for review of approval just next week. And so possibly those others could be that districts could consider as maybe preschool teachers or 6 through 12 if that's necessary. Of course, that has to be if there's funding left over, but definitely some opportunities there with this particular piece of legislation.
Excellent. Becky, you had mentioned earlier a comprehensive literacy plan that you are supporting districts in thinking through. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it can help them with the next steps?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is the perfect time to really take a step back and take inventory of everything that's going on in your district and put together a cohesive and coherent literacy plan so that you're not taking a piecemeal approach. A couple things to keep in mind. There's a lot of things out there that have science of reading slapped right on the cover, but make sure that you know what science of reading is so that you can properly vet it if you're doing something off the list like we just talked about. There's a follow-up adoption coming next year that will have new criteria along with the existing framework criteria. The Reading League also has curriculum evaluation guides that help you look at parts of programs that may not be aligned to the science of reading. So those might be some helpful tools for you. But I mentioned earlier about making sure you have a clear vision and that you've got measurable goals and outcomes and an equity focus throughout your plan. It's also really important to make sure that you have some common understanding of terms and that you have a commitment to evidence-based instruction. And evidence-based means that it's practices that are supported by rigorous research that has been peer-reviewed. You can't just throw around the term evidence-based and research-based. There's actually definitions to that and meanings behind it. Also placing an emphasis on culturally and linguistically responsive practices. So in our current project, the Literacy Coaches Grant, and in our previous project, the Early Literacy Support Block Grant, when we were the expert lead in literacy, we came up with a framework for systemic instructional capacity building. And we built our literacy plan template that we're using in the project on that model that really has you think through all of the parts of a comprehensive plan. And the first one is setting the conditions for literacy, learning, and success. And there's a lot of different ways you can define that, but part of it is your belief system, your approach to literacy, that you have data literacy going on, that you have data conferences going on, good classroom management, that you have MTSS systems and structures set up. It can take on a lot of different definitions, but what conditions are you setting at your school so that your students are successful and that your teachers can also be successful in what they're trying to accomplish? Along with the conditions, you need to consider your curriculum and your instruction. So research-based comprehensive program, and making sure that if you are bringing in any supplemental materials or also thinking about your tier 2 and your tier 3 instruction, that you have coherence across your programs. Oftentimes, we see a lot of supplemental programs being brought in when we're out visiting classrooms. And then what we end up doing is we end up burdening the child with the most needs. And what I mean by that is, let's say in your Tier 1 program, you have routines for blending that follow this pattern and use this language. And then they go to a Tier 2 intervention and you're using a different program and the routines and the terminology are all different and the sound spelling cards are different. So now we've asked the kids who are struggling the most to learn two different sets of routines and memorize and refer to two different sets of sound spelling cards. So how do we lessen the burden on the child who is struggling the most? So that's looking at coherence. We also want to make sure that we have an integration of language through everything we do. Language is everything, and reading is language. Are we using complex texts and evidence-based writing practices as well? Many times we walk through classrooms, and because of time constraints, we see teachers that are reading to students. This even happened to my own kid in honors middle school English. The teacher was doing a lot of the reading for them. So are kids grappling with complex text, and are we helping them figure out how to tackle that text? In your Tier 2 and your Tier 3 programs, making sure that you are targeting the skills in need with materials that are coherent to the Tier 1 program. Also, very clear protocols for how kids get into Tier 2 and Tier 3, that you're constantly monitoring the data so that kids can move in and out based on what their progress monitoring data is showing you. You also need to have a comprehensive assessment system. The screener is one piece of everything else that should be going on. There's progress monitoring, there's summative assessments, formative assessments, and you want to make sure that your teachers have data literacy and they're looking at that data often. We talked about the cohesive curriculum plan. You also want to have systematic capacity building. You have to provide professional development, not only for things like the materials that you're using, so they are being used as designed, but also all of that background knowledge, all of the research. I saw letters in the chat. I saw CORE's OLA. I saw training from GRR. All these great programs. AIM showed up. Hope I'm not forgetting anybody. There is no list yet. I also saw that there. The criteria is not out yet, but publishers or entities will be able to submit. There are great programs out there that are aligned to the science of reading, and you need to make sure that everybody has the proper training. And then it could also be that you have supports in place like coaching. We have 800 schools with almost 400 more on the way that receive funding for reading specialists, literacy coaches, and reading specialists. So what kind of support are you putting in place? And do those people have the proper training that they need, not only in content, but also in coaching skills? There needs to be support systems like coaching, but also like family and community engagement play a huge part of the success of a comprehensive literacy plan. How are you partnering with your families and making them a part of the process? What else? Putting supports in place for making sure that your students with disabilities are supported, and also supports for your multilingual students. Do you have designated and integrated ELD both? And do people clearly understand what those are? In most of our travels, we don't really see integrated ELD, and we very often do not see the time set aside during the day for designated ELD. That should also be coherent with not only the needs of the student, but whatever program your designated ELD is supporting. Typically, it's English language arts. It doesn't have to be, but in every content area, we should see integrated ELD. And do teachers understand the different language levels of their students? And one of our big misses out across the state, I think, is really understanding the content of the English language development standards. They are rigorous. People say they're doing ELD standards, but are we really looking at those standards? And do we know which ELD standards align to which ELA standards? And there are some crosswalks out there that help you do that. but they're very rigorous. And I would say in most cases, we're not really teaching language. So that would be maybe something for you to take a look at for your literacy plan. We talked about assessment and data use, that professional learning, family and community, and then also training for your leaders. We have a saying in all of our projects, every initiative lives or dies on the principal's desk. Can your principals lead this initiative? Can they? Do they understand about literacy instruction? Do they know what to look for and how to give feedback to the teachers? So that would be something definitely that you would want to include in your district plan. And then
Very good.
finally, one of our guardrails, my final one is continuous improvement. No plan is ever done. The more you learn, the more you know, the better consumer you become, the better implementer you become. So use a continuous improvement process to keep looking at your data to see if what you're doing is working.
So helpful, Becky. Well, thank you. That's all we have time for today, but thank you to everyone for giving us this opportunity to hear from these great leaders in the field in California. And thank you, Leslie, for allowing us to have the stage.